Hey guys, I'm Tony Tian, and if you're new to this channel, I'm a second medical student at University of Otago. So today the viewing angle might be a little bit weird because my phone is out of battery and I'm just recording on my iPad, and because the version of iPad has like an ultra wide camera, so I'm looking a little bit elongated. Well, anyways, let's get into the topic. So today what we're going to be talking about is the coronary artery. And so before we start, we always run through the anatomy part. And basically, the coronary artery is just artery, but it has many branches. So basically, coronary artery is the artery that supplies the heart itself. It's kind of like a weird thought because heart is sort of like the machine that pumping out all the blood, supplying everything, but it also needs to supply itself, so it can sort of supply itself. So it's literally supplying itself for the sake of supplying itself and also the rest of the body. Anyways, so we have two main branches, which is the RCA and LCA, the right and left coronary artery. The right coronary artery supplies the right ventricle, part of the septum, and the posterior of the left ventricle. And then you also have the LCA, which supplies the rest of the heart, and the major branch, LAD, the left anterior descending artery, supplies part of the septum as well. And then you have the posterior descending artery, which is either supplied by the RCA or the LCA, depends on if it's a right dominant heart or left dominant heart. If it's right dominant, then the RCA will be supplying it. If it's the left, it's the other one. And basically, the blood flow goes in from the pericardium, so it goes from the outside, the very outer layer, and once it gets to the side, it sort of perfuse through the really thick muscular layer to the endocardium. So basically, this makes the subendocardial region being the most vulnerable to decreased blood flow, and especially the subendocardial region of the left ventricle, because it's got a very thick muscular layer, and when the muscle is contracting, it's sort of putting pressure onto the blood vessel, therefore constricting the blood flow. So basically, one of the problems that we face in the heart all the time, pathological problem, is that 2/3 of the arterial system is actually embedded in the muscle. It's intramural, and all the refills happens during diastole, or at least 80% of the refill happens during the diastole. And yeah, just gonna change that. And if the patient has like a diastolic problem, then you can imagine 80% of the blood is not being perfused into the heart properly, so you get improper perfusion, and which is why we treat it with beta blockers in heart failure. Basically, it increases the diastolic length, because beta adrenergic blocker, you're blocking the noradrenaline and adrenaline effects on the heart, therefore making the heartbeat slower. So therefore there's a elongated diastolic time, and then you have more time to perfuse. And there's a bit of variation between the coronary blood flow between the left and right side. As I mentioned, the left ventricle has a thicker muscular wall, so therefore when it's contracting, you get a complete interruption of the blood flow during systole, and all the refill happens during diastole, and the compression happens in the subendocardium and due to the increased intramural myocardium pressure. So therefore, if you look at a pressure graph of the left ventricle, you see a complete drop, very abrupt, in the left ventricle, whereas the right ventricle is much better. The blood flow can still occur during systole, and it has much lower intramural pressure compared to the left, so it still got blood flow during the systole. So the flow fluctuation kind of matches the aortic pressure, which is how it's being supplied and all of that. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the supply and demand. So our heart actually requires a lot of oxygen. It's about 20 times more than skeletal. So therefore, we need a very strong supply of oxygen to maintain the energy expenditure of the heart. So therefore, it has very high capillary density, which confers a huge surface area for oxygen transfer, and also has a short diffusion distance, because as you can imagine, if the capillary is getting more dense, so each capillary are being closer to each other. So let's say if it's less dense, right, two capillary might be this far apart, but if it's getting really dense, then they're super close to each other, so less distance of diffusion, which means the oxygen, the nutrients can be transferred way faster. And also the heart itself has very high oxygen extraction, so it can extract about 65 to 75% of the oxygen to meet its demand. And part of the reason why this is happening is because the heart mainly uses fatty acids as a source of energy using lipids, therefore as using mitochondria and the Krebs cycle. Therefore, it uses a lot of aerobic metabolism compared to skeletal muscle, which can uses anaerobic, and also versus your brain, which only uses glycogen. So basically 65 to 70% of the oxygen is being extracted compared to about 25% for the whole body average. So therefore, it has a much higher partial pressure for the carbon dioxide in the coronary and sinus blood than the mixed venous blood. That's just something you'll be observed. Okay, and therefore, if you have increased demand, we also need some sort of regulation to meet the increased demand. So as I mentioned, it's oxygen driven, so it's stimulated by the oxygen deficiency, and even the 5% drop in coronary oxygen level is enough for the vasodilation to start happening. The local metabolic control will start to kick in. And it's regulated mainly by two substances. One is called adenosine. So a lot of you may have heard of the adenosine triphosphate, ATP. It's a very common energy molecule. It's probably the most common. And it is a product of the breakdown of the ATP during the myocardial cell utilization of energy. So it happens during heavy exercise or when you have a hypoxic ischemia. And basically it leaves the cell to reach the extracellular space and causes vasodilation, and is the most likely candidate in the coronary blood flow for the vasodilation. And then you have the nitric oxide as well, which is a very famous vasodilator. Is what the GTN spray is. It sort of induces endogenous nitric oxide to it kind of mimics the effect of the endogenous nitric oxide, therefore causing vasodilation. And therefore, the GTN spray is quite often being used in acute myocardial failure, myocardial infarction. So it's just to see if it can dilate the vessel a little bit, to allow the blood to flow through the plug, the thrombosis, and actually perfuse the part that's being hypoxic. Right, so it diffuses to the nearby vascular smooth muscle cell as well. If you remember, this is called the paracrine control. So you have the endocrine control, which is the whole body one, and you have the paracrine, which is the control of nearby cells. Lovely. And so basically, the nitric oxide is gonna, so this is the biochemistry part, it increases the concentration of the cyclic GMP. So it's not AMP, GMP, cyclic GMP, and it reduces the intracellular calcium concentration. It relaxes the vascular smooth muscle, the VSM, and then causes the dilation of the coronary artery. All right, so that's the basic of the coronary artery blood flow, and in the next video I'll also be mentioning about the coronary artery disease, so definitely keep yourself subscribe for that. So just hit the like button, that'll be great. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel as well, and don't forget to leave your questions or thoughts in the comment section below if you have any, and I'll see you next time. Bye.